We're going to begin the demonstration of our two-color watercolor now. Excuse me, our three-color watercolor. And there will be a lot of similarities in the way that we did the first two-color watercolor and this one. One of the similarities is going to be the fact that we're going to do the sky with three levels. We're going to have a light area, which we're going to completely cover the entire paper with raw sienna. We're going to have a middle tone area, which will be the second area, and is always very confusing to people because they'll tend to want to go into this third area. And the third area will be the darks with the blues. Now, we saw we could get some tremendous results with just two colors, doing the burnt umber and the ultramarine, using the burnt umber and ultramarine blue. Now we're going to find out with three colors we really have an opportunity to go a lot further as far as the actual brightness and colorfulness of our picture, really by just using one more color. The primary thing that's different on this one is we're not going to tape anything. It's very light around the horizon, so we're not going to go into a lot of detail as far as that part of it goes. However, we will do this a little bit differently in the sense that we're going to do the first stage and the second stage of the sky, which will be this light area and the middle tone area, and then we're going to allow the paper to dry completely. After the paper dries completely, we're going to do the second stage, which is going to be this right here. I used to attempt to do this particular scene in three color in one demonstration, but one of the characteristics of the raw sienna, just as the cadmium yellow, the Naples yellow, and colors like this, they have a lot of white pigment in them. And this creates an opaqueness that as you paint it on, I don't care how wet the paper might be, because they're rather opaque and they cut, meaning that they cover the paper and the pigment is a lot thicker, they will have a tendency to dry much more quickly than, say, the ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, or one of your other colors that are more like a dye and are very transparent rather than opaque. So because of that, we're going to start by doing two stages, allowing it to dry, then we'll put the third stage in there. So the first stage will be the light stage covering it with raw sienna, and then the second stage as we're going to see on the video right now. Now, as I mentioned, we want to do this in two stages. So let's begin, as always, by first of all wetting the paper down very thoroughly. Now, if you notice, we did not tape it. It's not necessary. We'll go right up to the edge. Now, I'm using about a 1-inch brush to wet this that I happen to have here, but that's why you have that 3/4 inch brush. And notice I'm just going right up against the edge and bringing it down like this. Now, we're not going to go all the way across with it. We're only going to do this one particular area. Okay, now we want to take our raw sienna, and generally I find on this half sheet of paper the 1/2-inch brush works very well. And we're going to come across. Now, the raw sienna, as I mentioned, it looks extremely dark, but it dries rather lightly. It's got a lot of pigment in it, and so it's a totally different thing as far as the way it ends as well as where it begins. Okay, now notice, I wanted to mention, especially on the raw sienna, it's one of those colors that if you don't mix it good in your palette, it'll leave streaks on your paper. So we're going to come in like this, and we're going to mix it very thoroughly here. And just bring it across like this. As long as we get it below the tree line, that's really all we're worried about. Okay, now I can already feel it beginning to dry at the top, even though I just started it. So now we're going to take the raw sienna, and we're going to add a little bit of the blue to it. It's going to give you somewhat of a greenish tint. You can't see it too well on the television, but that's what it's going to do. Not everybody's favorite colors, but some people like it more than others. Okay, we're going to primarily go with the raw sienna. Now notice how people do so many different things when they're doing something like this. I have people that do this, and they just do it all different ways. Let me show you how to hold your brush correctly. Mix a lot of paint. Waste a little if you have to. Now notice I never take my brush off the paper, just very slightly. And I come straight across, and of course it looks a lot darker than it's going to be. And then it's still the primary second color. So I'll mix a little bit more of the pigment. Now as I get out here, now I'm doing this on a separate sheet of paper, or a smaller sheet of paper than you're doing it. So consequently, if I wanted to, it's a small area, and I probably could go ahead and do the complete exercise right now. Now I like to come in, but for your sakes, I want to show you how to do it in 2 stages. And I'll put my raw sienna a little darker in here. Now, as I mentioned, the real problem is that this is one flat wash. It starts at the top, and it goes all the way down, then it starts across here and goes all the way down. Most people go from the first stage up here, and they jump to putting these clouds in. So this is what we want to eliminate. Now we're going to stop, allow this to dry, or let it set up for a few minutes and dry it with a blow dryer. And then I'm going to show you something that very few people know in watercolor, and that is that you can re-wet it and paint the second stage after it dries simply by re-wetting it. So we'll just put this on pause for a moment. Now your first stage should be completed, and you should be ready to do this with the paper completely dry. So let's begin by taking our brush again. Now this will surprise you because it does not affect what's under it when you re-wet it, and I doubt that very few people know this. Okay, and you see it, once it sets up, it doesn't affect it. Now, we're going to take the blue and we're going to mix it with our raw sienna, but it's going to be a little stronger color. It's going to be mostly blue. And notice we'll start over here. And we'll start putting it in. Now it never comes out the same color-wise, and we don't really care whether it does or not. Now notice again, see, people come in and they start doing things like this. And you can all learn from this, because notice I don't take the brush off the paper. Now this may not dry exactly the same color as some of the, each one will dry differently, so whether the color's the same or not is irrelevant. Alright, now you notice I went across with the dark clouds that are kind of breaking up. Then we're going to come over in this left-hand corner, bring that down just a tiny bit, and we're going to fill this in. And then notice I'm touching the clouds up here, at least that one, and bringing it across. Okay, and then I'm going to come in again. Now some of this is drying a little bit on me, but I can take care. Now you see how I'll take these two Have one little dry area here I'll pick up. Okay. And then we'll take the blue. Now, as I mentioned, 100 people could do this and no two would come out alike. So we're not really worried about it looking exactly like mine. Here's another lighter area here. Come back with another lighter area here. And then I might just put a little small cloud over on this portion. And then fill this in to kind of tie it all together like it's breaking up in the distance. Now, in this particular case, I did have it go a little bit over the roof line, but it's going to be a lot darker. Now, if you feel more comfortable taping the building, and some people do, just go ahead and tape it. Okay, and that's going to be pretty much it for our second phase. Now, as we go to the next section of our painting, it's going to be our trees in the distant area here, or the distant foliage behind the house. Now, what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to demonstrate just this area right here, and then I'm going to let you finish the other part on this side over here, as well as a little light area in the background. Now we're going to have the addition of one more color to our palette, and it's going to be Hooker's Green Light. And any of your Hooker's Green colors, regardless of the brand, they always have a problem in that they're extremely green. Of all the colors, focus that in a little bit closer now, of all the colors that you'll ever work with in photography or in this, the most complicated one and the most difficult one you'll ever do is going to be green, or work with is green, because it really does tend to be extremely strong, so you always have to tone it down with something like a raw sienna or an ultramarine blue. So in this case, we're going to take raw sienna and mix it with our green, and we'll start off. Now I like to use this flat brush. Like this. Now, I've always found it's a little easier either to turn your paper around or to come around this way if you're going to put in a section like this. Likewise, to do this. Let's see if I get that back on the television there. All right. To do this, you see. Watch how far you're supposed to go up. Now, after I get that in, now if you prefer, and it's a little easier for you, you can take a brush like this and come in and do this. You see, because it takes a while to get the hang of this big brush. But that's the way that I would do it. Now we're going to take the green and the raw sienna, and we want to move it out. And if you look along the horizon, you see that's a little bit too much green. I need a little bit more raw sienna to tone it down. Okay, now as I move further out, I'm going to take more of the raw sienna. Remember, this is supposed to be kind of a fall scene. And of course, a lot of this is not showing up too well on the television. A little bit darker than I want it there, so I'll add a little water to it. Now we're starting to get some of those richer colors mixed with the raw sienna and the green. Okay, see, I'm going to make it uneven at the top, and of course I'm going to leave a little hose for the birds to fly through. Now, after I've done that, there's areas you can look on there where you see the pure raw sienna coming through, so we'll just come in, darken a little bit more like this. Now, we're going to have the addition of the green and a little bit of ultramarine blue along with the raw sienna. And I'm going to come in, I'm going to make this a little bit darker in here. And then come out with it from the building like this and make it a little bit darker. Okay, and then the last thing, we're going to take the ultramarine blue and the green, and it's going to be very, very dark. And we'll make it pretty solid. Now that's how we want to do that area of foliage, and then we want to come across, do this area behind the house, and then the area behind here. Okay, so when we get through looking at our completed picture here, we want to have this part done, this, and this. Now notice, perhaps even before you start that, we might want to move to the end of it, take our brush and get a little bit of the faint green and color like this. And we'll put that light area in there first. Okay, and then start on the other side.
Okay.
Good. And this is what the finished part is going to look like at this stage. Okay, as we go to the next part of our demonstration here, you'll see a lot of similarities in what we're going to do here as opposed to what you did on the one-color watercolor. Now, what we're going to do is bring the camera in and focus it primarily on this building, which is going to make this work very nicely. And what we want to do is we're going to do this in 3 stages, and that's what you always basically want to remember. Step 1, we're going to look at the boards. Now if y'all remember, on the one-color watercolor we put a flat wash over everything, and then we came back and put the boards in like this. I don't know if you all recall what we did. Okay, on this one I'm going to start off right from the beginning, and I'm always wanting to think boards. Okay, so we'll come like this, and then I'm going to skip a little place for my posts. And again, remember, we're going right over everything. So we're going to bring this down, bring it down. You see, just like there's not anything under it. If you remember, with the one color, we put a flat wash over everything, let it dry, then we put the boards like this, you see? So however it is that you want to do it, it's really irrelevant. Now, we'll come over here, and we'll look at the roof. Okay, can I borrow that? All right, now, we'll come down. And we're going to put a flat wash on here. Now, I've got a photograph. I'm using a different brand, so some of these colors may look a little differently. In fact, you may look like you've, on this particular one, you've got a little bit more reddishness to it. That could have been the photograph, or it could have been this. But what you want to do is, if you want it to have a little bit more red in it, you can go ahead and add a little burnt sienna to it. Okay, now that's what I want to do for the first step. And I want to let it dry. Now I'm using a number 4 brush to do this. Okay, and actually it's a number 6, but we'll say it on the television, number 4. All right, because that's what you best want. Now, everybody's always wondering how to do these bricks. Now what we're going to do is we're going to lay them in there like a brick mason. Turn that brush sideways and just stagger them, see? Now, I'm not going to duplicate efforts. For instance, the tin roof on this is the same I'm not going to do it. Okay, and I'm not even going to do all the side of this one. Now, what you want to do is you allow that to dry, and then you come back and make some of them a little bit darker, and that's how I got the different, and you can put a little bit blue in it if you want, but you'll see if you use the color straight, it'll give you some pretty strong pigment. See how you get that? That's how you get the variety in the bricks. Okay. Now, on the side part of it, we're going to take and put a little blue in with the sienna. We're going to do the same thing. Now, the nice thing about it is you don't have to do all of it. You see, and if you look at your picture, you'll have the bigger pictures over there, and you'll just layer it in, and you'll notice a lot of it I just skimmed across, and then sometimes when I'm doing bricks I just fade it out like that, see? Because the main thing is to make it arty looking. You don't have to be perfect like it's a rendering. And I'm going to let that dry in a minute, and then we're going to come back and touch it up again. Okay, now up here, anytime you add that blue, it's going to grade it down so it makes it a nice shadow color. Now these are boards up at the top up here, and I'll leave that for right now because when this dries, I'm just going to put my shadow in and wash some of the other colors over it. Now, we'll just check back and see if this is dry yet while that part is drying. Now, second layer, be just like the one color, except we're going to take the one color you did this with the, actually the third layer. But this one we're going to do a little bit differently. Now, I've already made the brush strokes. So what I want to do is I want to come across here, and now you can kind of roll it over those boards a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. But I notice I'm going to do this transparently for the second stage. See, and then when I do it, I'm going to come across here all the way to the end of the building, you see, and then I'll maybe add a little bit more water to it, and I'm going to do this whole side now in a middle tone. And this will be at the end of my porch about right here. And what I'm teaching you to do, now you see as you thin it out, you notice how you'll allow a lot more of that yellow to come through, you see. Okay, now that looks relatively dark, but it's a good middle tone. Now, the next thing I would do is I would blow dry it again. Now, if you'll go to that blue and sienna pretty straight, without a lot of water, it's going to give you your black. Okay, now I'll come right straight across here. You might want to wiggle it a little bit to make it look like the corrugation. Same way over here. Make it very, very strong. It's just like any time you're doing these, you may want to layer it on there and then just come in, get your strong, strong dark to make your statement, and then just drag it down like this a little bit. You see, and it begins to give you that little reflected light that you'll pick up in that shadow, either from the upper part of the porch or just from the light around it. Okay, that's going to take care of our shadow. Now, we'll come back around here. Now, this is where I like to always bring this out to you all because I think this really helps. If you turn your paper like this and you're right-handed, you turn it the opposite way if you're left-handed. Now, what you want to always remember, because there's just one basic thing I'm teaching you here that you've learned from day one. When you go to do an object, you've got a light, you've got a middle tone, and a dark. And all you have to do is figure out when you're going to put the light in, and particularly with the pigment like it is, you let it dry, and then you put your middle tone, you let it dry, then you put your dark. And so the only difference in the watercolors, you've got to allow for that drying time. All right, and we'll come in here, we'll put our darker window. And then notice on the shutter, just a little bit of detail like this. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll come down with my brush, start putting the individual boards in. Now, I love to do this in pencil, and I love to do it like we're doing it. Now, I actually have a number 6 brush, and the only difference if you can use one is when you get your paint flowing, you can let it go a lot further. And notice what a difference just those few lines make. Now, we'll make it a little heavier here to show like it's the facing on the door, the inside part of the door, I should say. And then we'll put a few thin lines to show the door. Now, we'll come back around here again and just show enough. Now, you know, you don't want to be monotonous. You can skip it a little bit, let it have a little lost and found, but that picks up that part of it. Now, lastly, you may find that you want to come in and just dry brush some boards. See how you can come in and lose it a little bit? It's like you did on that other one if you really stop back and remember it, you see. And just put you some little peckerwood holes in there. And a couple of knot holes if you want. You see, and that pretty well finishes the side of it. Come in and put my dark shadow on the side of it here and here. Okay, and then finally, maybe have a little bit of the blue in this part up here, or as I said, you can add a little burnt sienna to it if you'd like. And we'll put some of the dry brush part on there to give the roof a little bit more interesting texture. And if you look at your picture, you'll see it's pretty rough. Now I want y'all to remember, I know this is like a lot at one time, but we're going to come back and I'm going to refresh your memory on doing it one stage at a time. Okay, we'll just tone that post down a little bit, tone that one down a little bit, and that's going to pretty well finish the building. Now the tree, let's just move it over here real quickly. And before we do the tree, let's look at this. Now, what I'll do here is once I get this part done and it's dry, then I'll just put me a little transparent wash over it like that. You see? Leave my little grass strokes on the bottom. Might even come all the way up here. You notice, again, how you can begin to simplify. And while that's even still a little bit wet, I might make this strong shadow under here and let it run a little bit. And then this is going to be wet, but I'm going to do it anyhow. And you'll put your little individual boards. And anytime you do that, you always can come back in between them and put the dry brush. Now, I got a little loose on these bricks on the side, but if you'll notice on yours, it's really not finished that directly. And of course, don't forget the shadow. You know, you always have the complete picture. The light roof, or light front, middle tone, and dark, you see. And that shadow pretty well settles it down. Now, remember, I don't even really need to do this lesson on trees, but just to refresh your memory, since we're in this area right now, this will help everybody out. You start, I'm doing all this with the same brush. Applying more pressure as you come down. You'll start with the main part of the tree like that, which we'll call the trunk. And you'll have your main branches coming out like this, you see, and evenly. And if it was you were looking from the top, it would be coming out the circumference. You'd see it filling it out evenly. And then on the branches, you'd have limbs, and the limbs would come off of each branch, you see, and it begins to form a network. And then on the ends of the branches, you'd have little twigs, okay, and you put that on that, and then lastly, you put your little twigettes right on the end of that. Now, this is not really what we have on this one. You come in, and again, it's because of the photograph and whatever, we're getting a little bit different color. But you notice how I just layered it in lightly, but simplicity is the key. And then I'll just start filling in my tree like this. Okay, now the next thing, and this is going to be the last thing I'll do at this point, we'll lift it up just a tiny bit now and see what it looks like. Just give me a chance, okay? Okay, now the last thing, and this is really going to be what y'all are going to do over the entire bottom area, okay? We're going to take some plain raw sienna, first thing we want to do is we want to come around the building like this. Settle all of this down. See how I'm grouping it all together? Now I've got this one rather large area, and notice I'm putting the raw sienna on pretty strongly. Okay, now as I come out here, I want it to appear like it just rained. It's kind of glistening. So I'm going to come out like this. And then notice as I come out here, I'll maybe have a little bit at this puddle. Here's the rule on puddles. Notice how I'm going to come around here and just have this very light. I'm going to drag it out. You see, and here's the rule on puddles. You won't see this too well in the small picture, but where you have a dark puddle, you can have a light area. Where you have a light area, in other words, you'll have a dark puddle against a light piece of land, and then you might have a lighter puddle against a slightly darker piece of land. You see? In other words, you just keep bouncing it back and forth like that. I'm not going to do the puddles now. I just want to mainly show you how to come in and layer this next section, and then we'll do the puddles at a different time. You notice how I'm dragging it out into the white, and just come down the whole bottom of the picture like this. Now, let's blow dry this part real quickly. The next thing, after I put the raw sienna, notice it's got a little bit of the green. I'm going to review this with you. I know it looks like a lot. Okay. But when you see it layered on there, it really is not that big a deal. All right, we want to put this green now right along here. Now that's always going to have a little bit stronger tint to it because of this particular brand of green is really very nice. It's just a strong color. And greens are difficult to work with. I don't care what you're working with. Okay. Now notice how I kind of just brought this out. I'm settling. What I'm really trying to do is to connect every bit of this. See, and then as I come down here now, I'm just going to bring this down like this and soften that edge with a little water. Now, I'd either do this while it was wet or while it was dry. Even when it's dry, you can do it either way. I'm going to come in with my really strong colors, and you'll see all the shadows on the side of it. And then I'll start putting this little stuff up against the house and up against here to settle it down, you see. And I might have had a little porch showing in the front, but it doesn't matter. I just mainly want to always have whatever darks I have in here. I want to have enough of it around the object to do this. That's a little more than I wanted, but it's all right. Just lift it back up again or just fade it out like this, you see. Now that concludes, and again, I think if I let that dry, you could get your darks in a little bit better, and you can see that. But you get the general idea. No matter what you're doing, if you're doing this building, it's 3 steps. Layer the lines in first, then put the middle tone under here, under the shadow part as well as this. Then you let that dry, and you put your strong darks in. I think everybody can remember that. On this one, you put your lighter tones, your darker tones, let all of it dry, and you put your shadows in. Now the raw sienna I put down here, you just want to put that over everything but the puddles and let it go into almost glistening white out here. And then when that dries, I'll show you how to put the puddles in and go ahead and put the next part of the dark. But I think this is going to keep you all out of trouble for a little while.
You're going to get into trouble.
As we begin the next session of our recording, as you recall, if you'll look on step 6 of your instructions, we did the lighter raw sienna on the first part of the foreground. Actually, on step 5, you can see we covered the entire foreground with the raw sienna. In step 6, we darkened the rounded puddles and everything else. So let's go ahead and complete that particular portion of it so we can keep everything in sync, which will be to put the raw sienna over the entire foreground area, leaving. Remember how I mentioned we're going to drag this out, give it a glistening effect, leaving the puddles white. And kind of dragging the brush out that way. Now, in my layout of this thing, I was probably laying it out very quickly. Notice I'm using, by the way, that flat brush. It's just something I always get in the habit of using the largest brush possible for these large areas. A lot of people are timid about that, but there's a reason for it, and every good watercolor book will tell you. It says areas of your painting you want to be loose and you want to be free. So the progression is always from the broad picture. Now I just covered up part of my puddle there at the bottom, but we're not going to worry about it. If I want to bring it back out again, we'll just do that. That would be close enough. So see, like a really important point about emphasizing where to leave these whites and all that, but you'd be surprised at how many people really just forget and don't pay attention and cover it up. And that's why I think it's so good to have, in addition to the photographs and the written, extremely explicit written instructions, it's just good to have this extra information. Now, notice on this particular painting, I didn't do the foliage behind here nor the roof. I feel like that's repetitious, and it's enough for you to be able to follow. Now, I'll put this on pause for just a second and blow dry that foreground. Now, if you look at your colored picture and your reference picture, you'll see that the base of this has our darks actually darker here, grading out, getting lighter as they go out towards the edge. Now, what I really attempted to accomplish in this composition, and you'll see it in a moment, is to actually have my tree coming down as a counter movement, catching the flow of all of these clouds and the trees and the sunlight, and actually capturing your eye, bringing it down here, letting the grass bring you here, and then through the gradation of the darks and the puddles, bringing your eye right back into the center. And that's really what we are attempting to do. So, with that in mind, we'll start right here. Now we're going to make this a rather light mixture initially. We may darken it in a moment. But it's going to be the blue and the gray. It's going to give you a little bit of a brownish tint, a grayish tint. I should say gray-green. And then if you want to take a little of the pure sienna, which is what I'm doing now after that first part came out pretty gray, that's fine. Just get your contrast in there nice and strong. And then you don't have to worry if it's not exactly the same. It worries a lot of people too many times unnecessarily. Now we'll just come up to this area. We'll do the same thing again. Of course, you can do it to whatever level. Now look at how that puddle, with just that little bit added to it, begins to really stand out. Now up here, I noticed after it dried, I put the green in. I could have some of this in a little stronger with the pure raw sienna. That's fine. Make our puddle stand out a little bit better. And then even possibly where it comes in here. But each of these things can be handled independently. But now look at how we're beginning to get a gradation or a flow. Now we'll come a little bit darker here, same way. See how I'm just dragging all of it into the distance. And up at this top part where we want it nice and strong, let's get some of that pure raw sienna color. Notice I'm purposely allowing some of the streaking areas to come through. Now I'm not afraid to get a little stronger here because I know that ultimately all of this will be somewhat stronger value-wise, meaning there'll be a little bit more blue to the raw sienna. So we'll just drag that all the way across like that. Now again, since I know it's going to be a little bit darker, I'll just come in while it's still wet, make it a little bit strong. I may still have to come back and do a little bit more of this later, but this always does have a tendency to dry lighter. But notice again how I'm giving it movement that's making this come back up around here. It looks very well. Okay. Now again, we'll put the blow dryer on it. Now before we go to the next section, which is going to be the tree, I want you to look closely at your composition, and this is what you're going to see. These are like rows in a field. They've been plowed and you've got water puddles setting up in them. First of all, you always will have a kind of a thicker line, darker edge along the area that you can see at the base of your area, what shall we call it, the raised area above the puddles. Now, when you go and you put the dark in that strongly, you always want to kind of dry brush it a little bit up, soften some of the edges a little. It's actually going to give you a feeling of being round now. We'll come back and do the same thing here. See, anytime there's a puddle, if you just put that little strong line like that, you'll make it jump out. Now I think this is important enough that I'd like to put a little bit of it on a little bit closer on the screen for you, and you can just see how immediately it'll begin to make that jump out. Of course, all of this is going to get smaller as it gets away from you. But you want to have your blue and your raw sienna fairly strong, and then you can just take your brush and soften the edges and blend it on up, dry brush it, wet brush it, whatever you want to do. But that completes the effect that we want to have in it. And then up here, even though all we want is a slight line, notice how just by doing one side of the puddle, preferably, or always I should say, the part that faces you and is actually up against the water is always going to be a little bit darker because it's a little bit wetter. Okay, now while I'm doing this, I don't want to forget that a little bit higher on that. Okay. Then I've got some areas at the base before I start putting that tree in. Now you notice again that strong movement, how it leads your eye up and back around. I'm going to come back in. Put this in a little bit darker in this section. Okay, now this will be a good stopping point, and you can go ahead and finish that particular area, and then we'll put our tree into the left and the first part of our puddles, and then we can go ahead and do the final part of it. So we'll go ahead and pause for you right now. Now we'll now resume with our tree on the left. And it's very crucial to observe what a tree does. So let's have a lesson on that right now. Now notice, I know you probably can't see this very well. I have a number 6, or you can use a number 8, but I have it fully charged, very opaque, and I have it flat like a pencil broadsides. And the reason I have it flat is I want it to do like a pencil. Now you can't see this too well, but I'm beginning to pick up a number of areas where it's dry brushing. And I want this to be a predominantly dark area. I'll just bring it right on down to the base of where our grass area is going to be. Now again, since this is going to be kind of a major area, and I know I want to do this, I'll take my blade. You've done this before. Scrape some interest in the tree limbs. Now, for your purposes, you want to remember that what we're looking at now is your main trunk on your tree. I want you to notice the symmetry whenever you begin to do a tree. We're going to come off of it with what I'll, for want of a better word, our main branches. And maybe we can focus on a detail of just this one area here. Let's see if we can bring that in a little closer. And I want you to know that as we come off with these branches, it's basically, I can do it either way. I can come out, and twist, and apply pressure, or go the other way. But there's a symmetry. It's like you have a straight line, and you have these main branches that come out, and they're going to be symmetrical. We have one there, they're going to follow a pattern. And this one I went a little bit low with it, but that's all right. I'll just put another one up here, even if it's not exactly like the tree we've got. Okay, now, notice the way that I move the brush around and tried to actually create a little bit of interest and excitement, really, with just by the way I applied pressure and did the different things that I did with the brush. Now notice on this one, I'll come from this direction. See, I can get a fairly fine point and just keep twisting. Let's get a little bit more water on that. Applying pressure. Now, you want this to be the ultramarine blue pretty strongly, but have it toned down somewhat with the raw sienna. And see, I'll have my branch this way coming the other way. Now, notice what I've done. And then I have another small one that comes up in here. Always try to remember they're like limbs on a human body. They're going to start thinner and get thicker as they get closer to the base. Now notice I could draw a center line down the middle of this and kind of a curved line this way and a curved line this way. Not only will the shape be symmetrical around the outside edges, but I've tried to fill in the tree, balancing the branches on both sides. Okay, so notice how the branches really are miniature trunks. We have the trunk, the branches. Now let's go to the limbs. Now you'll find that on the limbs, they're just little miniature branches, and you relate to them and do them just the way you did the branches on the main trunk itself. I don't know whether you're following this, but there's always a balance. You have one on one side, you do one on the other side. And that's the way nature compensates for itself. Here we'll come in with our limb here. You notice it's a pattern just like what I did. It's symmetrical on both sides, and you just basically fill the area up. But you have to remember they're always lighter, thinner I should say, getting thicker. And I like to break them in different ways that I've learned from, particularly on Mr. Kautzky, that I've studied through the years, and always have been intrigued with his trees. Okay, now again, I'm really not going to follow the photograph as closely. Maybe I should, but okay, I'll come in, and up at the top, you're going to have a lot of small limbs. This is where, once you get your basic shape in there and you're on the right track, loosen up a little bit. It's a kind of a fallless scene. And then after we put the trunk and then the branches and then the limbs, off of the limbs you're going to have little twigs coming. And they'll be just little small things. They can be various sizes. And depending on how much you want to do. And then as one student said it to coin the word, at the end of all the branches and the limbs and whatever and the twigs, you're going to have the twigettes. And it's kind of funny in a way, but what you'll do is if you'll look at limbs, you'll see that the ends of them basically just have jillions of little bitty tiny limbs coming out. So here we'll just fill in as necessary. And I think this is pretty close to what we want. Now here where my areas behind it is a little bit darker, I would just lighten it either with white paint or scrape it out. Now, after putting that base part in there, I'll go back to my flat brush now. I'll take the raw sienna, mostly the raw sienna as you see in your little sample picture. And at the base of my tree, I'm going to have a little grass area where they actually plowed around the tree as they'll do in a big open field like that. So I'll come down here. This is going to be darker. And then I'll actually come up. Now notice I'm using this large flat brush. And depending on how dark your section is, I just come up pretty much like what you see in your picture. That's why in the photograph I left a lot of it unfinished. Now, since this area is dry and it's very difficult to tell what's going on, we're going to drop back down to either a number 6 or a number 8 brush. And we're going to take and do the first portion of our puddles as you see in step 7. Now, I've had a lot of disagreement through the years about these puddles. Mostly people think that they can't really be that long. That the building, they can be no larger than the height of the building. But if you'll ever study like a lamppost across a lake, which may be miles across, that lamppost can reflect and actually the light can glisten all the way down across the entire lake. So reflections can be tricked by the eye to go as far as we want them to go. So let's begin first of all by noticing our post. And you have to be very careful to be straight. Now, on the front of it here, I'm going to make this relatively light. And if we had our little area down here, you could do it here. But that doesn't matter. And since it's boards, I actually just want to come across. And notice I'm doing it one flat tone. Some areas I might even allow the white to break through. Sometimes I allow it to break through in the puddle. But notice I'm going to stop now with one flat tone. I made sure I went down this area and followed it. Now we'll do the same thing here. Now, I don't know how much of this you'll actually see on your sample, but I almost forgot these little areas right here. So we don't want to forget them. Again, pretty much doing this like you would do your flat pencil broadside. Okay, now you notice how everything, this comes down this way, this comes down this way, and so forth. Now I'm going to step over here, and where I have the shadow coming down from the building, I just want to make sure my lines are lined up straight. Now because the bricks flow somewhat horizontally, I'm going to put my shadow in a little bit different direction. And then notice I'm going to make it flow with the flow of the bricks. Now, this is not that crucial. It'd be that perfect, but again, it's something I love to do because each little thing that you do like this, as far as I'm concerned, creates a lot more interest. Okay, now we've put the first part of the puddles down and completed step 7. And I think you can see the composition begin to come together. Notice the flow now of the movement coming across here, strong movement of my puddles this way, counter movement this way, all creating space and depth and interest. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop now. And this would be a good part for you to do before we finally put in the finishing touches on it. Now we're going to go in for our final part of it to conclude it. And this is where, because of the fact that this is rather dark, we want to make sure we come in and put some individual grass areas in here. And in the base of it that stick out a little bit more. Now the nice thing about this, if it's a little wet, you want to create a little more interest, you can always come in and do something like this with your blade. If your paper should dry, I'll come back a lot of times like this. I'm scraping through the darks I just put in. Let's put a few more over here. If you notice that I have this entire foreground area somewhat subdued, it's doing what it's supposed to do for me, and that's basically just carry your eye over. It's not a high interest area, and I'm not trying to make it big. Now, notice again, the only thing I'm doing down here is creating enough things so that we have a lot of counter movement actually going in front of this. That just creates a lot of interest. Now, as I mentioned, you can come in, you can drag it up like that, and I think that's always very, very interesting. Lastly, we'll take our number 8 brush. We're going to take the raw sienna relatively strongly, put a little bit of blue in it to make sure it stands out, and just study the picture. We want it to be very opaque. Sometimes if it's too dark, you can just take a little white paint and mix it with it. Look at how that glistens with that because of the water in it. Now that'll all dry shortly and you'll see it settle down into place. Now a lot of our reference material, this comes up looking a little bit more brown. If you want to add a little bit of burnt sienna, if you have it to it, you could do it to get that particular color, but I think it looks fine. Never really worried about color in something like this. If I get the value right, the rest will take care of itself. Now, as soon as this dries and we get the glare off of it, it's going to start looking a little bit more like foliage. Now, come out here, and really, that's why I try to tell people all the time, don't use old paint. Don't beat yourself to death in your brushes and everything else. You want to get the spontaneous effect of being able to put that in there one time and leave it. And we've got quite a bit on this branch here. Now I'm trying to indicate a fall scene. A lot of the foliage is already off of the tree. So we just want, again, something to break it up, something to fill in that area, make the clouds recede. And that's going to pretty well take care of that. If you want to stop now or wait a little bit and go to the next part with us, you can. Now, here we want to come in and we're going to take a little bit more blue. Isn't this nice to have just two colors where you don't really have to worry about how perfect it is? And or whether it's right or wrong. You know, like in the two color, I always like to say you can never be more than half wrong, and that's nice to know. Well, on this one, you can never be more than a third wrong, or 2/3 wrong, or whatever. It doesn't really make any difference. All right, now coming down a little bit lower with that, we'll take our time, put our dark shadows in. Now, while I'm in the area, I also like to come out right up under here in the puddle and put some little shadow areas in and blend it down. And if you look closely at your photograph, you'll see that in a lot of the places. Just something to give it a little bit more of a watery effect. I may even be overdoing it, but you'll see how that just settles it down very, very nicely. We'll move over to this side now, and we know that the area over on the side here is going to be much darker. So we'll make sure we lined up vertically. Bring it across like this and like this. Now, this is where it's very important just to settle it down, come underneath here with your dark and blend it out. Same way here. Get a little bit of lost and found in it actually. And that pretty well settles those puddles down and concludes that part of it. And then up in this upper right-hand corner, just for the heck of it, you can really do this with your brush. But since we're going to do one little bitty last section here, let's just look at this again. I've got a number 8 brush. Look at how fine the point I can get. And what I like about using a brush like this is I can twist, apply pressure, and never have to charge my brush again. And it gives me the exact size I want once I learn to control it. And that's something worth working towards. By the way, when you're doing foliage, in this particular case, I did the foliage, then I added the limbs rather, then I added the foliage because I knew the limbs would be relatively dark. But sometimes I'll plan where my foliage goes and actually put the foliage in first and have the limbs go around it. There's a little bit more going up there than what I'm showing, but you get the general idea. And again, this just further serves, as your eye comes around, to be something to drag you back in again. So you don't go out of the picture as you come around this way. Again, notice I'm clustering the foliage towards the middle. And we'll drag it out this way slightly. There we go. It's coming out nicely. You can see it up here. But a little bit coming out here. A little bit up here. And just kind of work it in. See, sometimes it'll get a little solid like that, so I'll just come right out from that and go around the edges. I think this is going to pretty well conclude our demonstration. I'll never forget when I first learned by a similar painting to this, very similar, that I used to use in the textbook by Mr. Kautzky. I was always amazed at what 2 colors could do and what 3 colors could do, and even 4 colors. And what I guess really amazes me more than anything is the fact that when you tend to start with too many colors, it's very, very easy to lose it, to get muddy, to get confused. But when you really understand your values and you see just how much you can do with 1 or 2 colors, it's a lot of fun. So with that in mind, good luck. We'll conclude the, and I might mention, even though this is not in the composition, sometimes I'll come back in now, and if I need to do little areas like this to create a little interest, little clusters, anything, like this, just puts a little bit more into the painting. With that in mind, we'll conclude it.